Well, welcome to Talk It Out Tuesday. If we haven't met before, my name is John. I'm a pastor at the Rock Christian Family, and today I am joined by a very special guest, Ben Pearson. How you doing?
Good, mate.
Good. Yeah, I'm doing well. So right now we are in a series called Investigating Jesus, and part 3, we're going through the Gospel of Luke.
Yeah.
And we just did part 3 where we looked at Jesus calling his first disciple, calling Peter to follow him. And I know for you, that could be one of your favorite stories in Scripture. There's so much that goes on in those few verses in just one chapter. For us in the 21st century, as sophisticated human beings, looking back at what the context was for Peter and Jesus taking him out into the boat and telling him to fish in the day to drop the nets, how does that story relate to us?
You're right. There is so much going on, and I think we skip over it when we read the text. We kind of don't understand the fullness of the picture. We kind of get a bit of an outline, and I think we jump to conclusions probably far too quickly about a lot of things in that passage. And so it's worth knowing that there would have been a lot of people around.
Yeah.
It wasn't a private conversation as such. Although it was between two people, there was a lot going on. It was a busy, influential place in a harbour, boats coming and going, boats full of fish.
Yeah.
Peter's is not. It's not looking good for him.
Yeah.
He doesn't look like, he's not the gun guy who comes in with the boat full of fish. He's the guy who comes in with nothing.
Yeah.
So he looks like the failure.
Yeah.
And yet Jesus talks to him. And then it's, this Jesus character had created a lot of attention. He had a following. And we understand that today as like a whole lot of people following him on Facebook. Well, following back then was literally people walking behind him, listening to every word he said.
Yeah.
And so they're interested to know. And so you got these kind of two scenarios, a busy harbour and this big following of people come to listen to this conversation with this guy who's failed at his own job.
Yeah. So Peter and his crew had just finished a night's work, right? Before this interaction with Jesus happened. Then you got the crowd following Jesus that want to be there. And then you've got the other boats that just happen to be there as well. And they're more Peter's peers. Maybe the crowd is more Jesus' peers, and it's all coming to a head.
Yeah.
A point.
Yeah, and then Jesus says this bizarre statement. Jesus the carpenter walks over and says to Peter, hey, have a go at fishing on the other side of the boat.
Yeah.
As though they were fishing on the other side of the boat and got nothing, we'll try another side. I can imagine Peter just really wanting to just say, what are you playing at?
Yeah.
Where are you going with this?
Yeah, that'd be like, I've never touched a welder in my life.
Yeah.
That'd be like me telling you how to weld.
Yeah.
I have no experience in you going, well, I don't know, but I'll try.
And that's the humility of Peter.
Yeah.
That comes right out there.
Yeah.
The humility of him is, I think in one text it says that he told Jesus he'd been fishing all night.
Yeah.
But he doesn't argue with him.
Yeah.
If you, in that scenario, I'd probably say to you, John, maybe just let me do my job.
I know what I'm doing.
But he doesn't, right? His humility is such that he knows Jesus enough and knows about him enough and had seen stuff enough to go, I'm gonna listen to this guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I imagine him just turning to his crew, because he wouldn't have been alone, right? Those nets were heavy.
Yeah.
He just cleaned them all. That was probably a good couple of hours work. He'd hung them all up ready for the next night. I can imagine him turning to his crew and his crew just going, what?
Yeah. Yeah. Back to back shifts is what they're looking at.
I can imagine Peter just going, just humour him.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know where this is going.
Yeah.
I don't know what he's playing at. I don't know whether he's just annoying us or whether there's something in this.
Can you tell us a bit about Peter before this moment? Was he a well-educated man? Was he successful? What was he like?
Well, Peter was fishing. He wasn't studying. He wasn't following a rabbi. He wasn't. He was back in his family business. So it's pretty safe to assume that Peter was not highly educated. He didn't see his future around leading people or guiding people or in politics or in some influential position. He just went back humbly to his family business.
Yeah, and in those...
Probably his brothers and his father on the boat with him.
Yeah, and in that context, would the crowd, the other boaters and the crowd there know about Peter and know that maybe he wasn't super successful or what they would deem as successful?
Yeah, I think so. And he had an empty boat.
Yeah.
So even at fishing, he wasn't doing that well.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say, hey, he just had a bad night, which is probably could well be the case.
Yeah.
Or he could be no good at that either. And so Jesus platforms a person who the world wasn't platforming.
Yeah.
Jesus wants to know a person who the world potentially was just ignoring. And Peter would have felt like that. And I think that there's a real significance in it. I think that, when you read scripture as a Christian or as a person who's discovering the Bible, sometimes a person or a character jumps out at you and you just resonate with that person. Yeah. You see perhaps your own life in that person. Yeah. Peter is that for me personally. I left school in year 10. I never saw myself going and studying scripture. I failed English. I never saw myself studying languages like Greek and Hebrew. And yet God had a different plan.
Yeah.
And that's the case for Peter. He had a totally different plan for Peter's life.
Yeah.
And Jesus wasn't accidentally talking to Peter. He went after Peter.
He chose him.
And it's a message for those of us who are sitting in church today and think, the world has looked over me. Well, Jesus hasn't.
Yeah.
Jesus hasn't looked over you. And he's got a message for you. And he's got plans for you that potentially are way outside your thinking, way outside your capacity. I don't think you could have spoken to Peter hours before that event and said, Peter, do you see yourself being an author in one of the most famous books the human race would ever see?
Yeah.
Do you see yourself as one of the most influential leaders of the early church? Do you see yourself walking into rooms and speaking to people who are highly educated in Hebrew and Greek and the Jewish culture and reasoning with them? I think Peter would have, no. I see myself, I want to buy another boat.
Yeah.
I'd like to have maybe 2 fishermen crews. He probably had aspirations in his own little fishing business.
And it speaks to the humility that you're talking about with him, right? To not ignore Jesus's invitation to do something that he thought wasn't going to work, but he says, because you say so, because it's you, Jesus, I'll let down my nets. And later on, once he lets down the nets and he catches an abundance of fish, he's just in awe of what's just happened, and he falls to Jesus's feet or his knees, it says, and he says, get away from me, Lord. Get away, I'm a sinful man. And I think sometimes we can put ourselves in that situation as well, where we might not feel good enough to be chosen or to be following God, to be following Jesus. And so we distance ourselves purposefully, but that's just not the heart of God. He wants to draw near to you.
There's an attractive quality in Peter that Jesus sees, I think, and it's his humility.
Yeah.
And I'd argue that humility is still one of the most attractive qualities in us as humans, to each other and to God. We love as humans to see someone who's overly confident, but it grows tiring to us.
Yeah.
What never grows tiring is to see someone's humility. And God sees that. And God saw it in Moses. God saw it in Abraham. God saw it in Peter. He saw it in a number of different people right throughout Scripture. And he still sees it today.
Yeah.
He sees the people who don't think that they're good enough. He sees the people who don't think that they're able enough or capable enough. And he just does the absolute extraordinary through it. And that's Peter's story. And Peter, it goes along the way. And one of the other reasons I resonate with Peter is he's always saying things that are sometimes out of line. He kind of gets caught out so many times.
Yeah.
I think he suffers from a little bit of sticking his foot in his mouth.
Impulsive speech.
Yeah. There's a little bit of something going on there for Peter, but it's his honesty.
Yeah.
It's his inquisitive nature, and he has a heart to pursue God like nothing else. And I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah. One of the things that I like to say, just as we wrap up, is that God will do something extraordinary with someone that's ordinary.
Yeah.
Like just in any ordinary person. And to be honest, we're all ordinary, and God can do extraordinary things through that. And all we need to do is have availability. Mm-hmm. The best ability that someone could have is availability to say, because you say so, God, I will let down my nets. I will do whatever that letting down my nets represents in my life. So
Peter is prepared to put everything on the line.
Yeah.
He's prepared to give up his business, leave his family. He's prepared to give up his own aspirations, his own plans. He gives everything up. His availability and his commitment to follow God is inspiring.
Yeah.
And it has nothing to do with who he was or who he thought he could be.
Yeah. And that single act of obedience of letting down the nets, even when it was costly, even when it was inconvenient for him, just changed the trajectory of his life. If he would have said no, we have no idea who Peter is today.
No.
So.
No. He'd probably be have a fishing boat company or something named after him.
Yeah.
although maybe not, because he wasn't very good at that.
Yeah. He's coming up empty in all areas. Well, thank you, Ben, so much for taking the time and discussing this. And this coming up Sunday will be part 4 of our series, Investigating Jesus, How We Know and Why We Follow.